All right. So to proceed and turn it over, I know you're excited for this Learning Forum series as this is our first webinar series this year for this 2022. Allow me to introduce your facilitator for today. He is a certified coach and facilitator by the American Management Association, and he is also under the ACC level of International Coach Federation. He also have PhD in leadership and organizational development. Some of his certification is from the global leadership from the Thunderbird School of Management in Arizona. He also have master's degree in business administration in the Ateneo de Manila Graduate School. And he is a silver medalist for this, and he is also graduated honors from the University of the Philippines, and of course, he also have his just recently he completed his leadership and organizational development in PhD. So without further ado, I'll turn you over to your facilitator, Mr. EJ Zara.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Sandra, for that very nice introduction. And I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar on the best practices of managing a virtual workforce. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this 1-hour webinar. As we have been in the new normal of handling teams evolving from, of course, ad hoc to critical and fundamental work structures, we may, in fact, have some challenges as regards this, especially for most large and medium-sized companies. And this is in the space of prioritization and coordinating work. And of course, this course will highlight the difficulties and the challenges and how to overcome some of these as we meander through the COVID-19 pandemic and of course, as we handle our virtual teams. And as you may all have already experienced, virtual teams face different challenges and require a different leadership than more or compared to more traditional counterparts of leadership styles. And they often span functions, of course, when you handle virtual teams. They often span functions, time zones, national borders, languages, disciplines, and even culture. And all factors that I have mentioned add to the complexity of our workplace as of today. And of course, another challenge in handling virtual teams or in managing virtual teams would be, of course, the challenge of low engagement, which can be a serious problem with teams. And one major driver of this is, of course, multitasking because of the different roles that we play in the workplace and, of course, in handling our home teams. Again, as Sandra has mentioned, my name is EJ Zara, and I'm humbled to be with all of you today. It would be also nice to know where you are joining us, so please keep the chat box active. Can you please quickly chat with us where you are in the world and where you are joining us from? It would be nice to get to know you as we start this webinar. So I'll be waiting for some of your answers over at the chat box just so that I get to know where you are joining from within the Philippines, of course, and also in other countries. I see a lot of really nice names, and I'm not sure where you guys are joining us from. I don't see anything. Okay, so we have some people coming from, well, Cheryl is coming from Parañaque. Dolly is from Bulacan, Philippines. Thank you from Makati, Santa Rosa, Laguna, Quezon City, working in Alabang. I see a lot of people in Quezon City. I'm also based in Quezon City. We have people from Iloilo. We have from Pasig, Ortigas. We have from Bulacan. I am also thinking that we have people from other countries. So please feel free to just Quezon City from WorldLink. Thank you very much, Mia. And of course, JGC Philippines in Alabang. Hi, Nancy. Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us today. Muntinlupa, Quezon City. I think Quezon City is quite popular because it's a big city. And I know that we have people joining in from Indonesia. I'm just not sure if they are here. So if you're here, just please chat with us. There you go. Handrian from Indonesia, right? Thank you for joining us today. And I am privileged and humbled to be your facilitator for today, everyone. Okay, so let me share my screen already. And I hope that you can see my screen. Okay, so we have people also joining from Makati. Can you please give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? I hope that you can see my screen already. All right, very good. Okay, so the goal of
Napakalakas.
this webinar, thank you very much. The goal of this webinar is to provide you leaders with tools, competencies, best practices, and insights that will help you lead virtual teams successfully. And from this overview model that you are seeing on the slide here, you see five main discussion areas. And these are defining your role as a virtual leader, building the virtual team, leading a virtual communication or lead through virtual communication rather, how to coach and develop virtual skills for others, and of course, how to facilitate virtual meetings. And as we start our discussion, I would like to mention as early as now that in organizations with better virtual teams and leaders, the following are actually true. They say that if you are a good manager or leader of a virtual team, you will see that high performing virtual teams tend to have higher engagement levels. Virtual leaders of such teams tend to know and they use tactics that help keep people interested and of course active in their jobs, especially during meetings. When you are good in leading a virtual team, challenges are met. Good virtual team leaders know how to build relationships among their team members and how to manage conflicts among them. They also often outperform their co-located colleagues, and this was based on research. Virtual leaders are seen as needing additional skills, however, specific to leading virtual teams. And I would like to commend everybody for joining us today because this means that you're interested in your upskilling of these additional skills. Because good virtual leaders, and for that matter, team members, are better at coping with the complexities related to working within global and or highly diverse domestic teams. They also are better at addressing issues related to low levels of virtual team member experiences and of course knowledge. And while all leaders need to demonstrate highly effective leadership, how this gets done in the virtual work is different and really requires us as leaders to be more, I guess, disciplined and diligent in shifting our leadership skills to those that are effective when working at a distance or while working as we are at home. And research has shown that effective leadership is the number one factor that influences success in a virtual organization. And this was a research done by SHRM Research Quarterly. And this was as early as 2010. They've already found this out. Yet, of course, as I show you the model that we have or will be using as basis for our webinar today, realistically, as we only have an hour for this webinar for today, I have chosen to focus on the first two discussion areas of the model shown previously, just so that we are also, of course, going to be ending on time, and just so also that we get to understand a or a good glimpse of what this entire program is all about through these two focus areas that I will be discussing with you today. And so related to which we have the following webinar goals. We would be analyzing how personality styles of both leaders and team members will impact a virtual team. We will also assess and address the strengths and weaknesses of virtual team members and recognize the unique stages of team building for virtual teams. And I am hoping that we end on time, and I'm also hoping that we have some space for question and answer later on because we would like to welcome those as we facilitate this webinar for you. As we start our webinar, of course, we would like to invite everyone to adhere to these set of ground rules, which I'm sure we won't have a problem with, just to make sure our engagement today is meaningful and, of course, learning filled. And so, if you are all ready, we shall now proceed with discussing the first part of our agenda today, defining your roles as a virtual leader. Can I get a quick thumbs up if you're all ready to start the first focus area that we will be discussing for today? How do we define our role as a virtual leader? So, thank you very much for your thumbs up. Let's proceed now with discussing the meat of our webinar for today. For this first part of the webinar, I would like to present to you our objectives and our goals. We would like to identify the challenges in leading virtually. We would like to increase awareness of your personality style and its impact on virtual leadership, and assess your strengths and weaknesses of your team members as you work within the virtual environment. Please feel free to chat with us if you have any questions as I move along the topic of the first part of our webinar. So I'd like to run a quick poll, and this time I'd like to use this application called Slido, and I'd like you to answer this question. In one word, are there any additional challenges that you have faced when leading a virtual team? And you can actually join us at accessing this particular poll. Please join us at slido.com. So just type in over at your browser www.slido.com, and then over at that hashtag, you will see manage virtual, and you can also scan the QR code on the screen. And here, I'd like to ask you, in one word, are there any additional challenges when leading a virtual team? So I'll be waiting for your answers. So now I see someone saying focus. Let's wait for the others to chime in on their challenges. Of course, the internet is a challenge. I'm sure that you are, well, probably in the Philippines. Disengagement is a challenge. Yes, silo and working in silo. And we have experienced this even before the pandemic, but I guess this is something more apparent now that we're all working virtually. Trust is there, and I see a lot of people voting on trust, because the bigger it is on the word cloud, that means a lot of people are answering that particular word over at this poll. You have noise, yeah. You have connection. You have accessibility, boundaries. Wow, distractions. But the main points that you're all challenged with would be focus, trust, and of course the internet. These are the three big answers out of this poll, and I'd like to thank you for joining us in this poll. We have 14 participants who have already given us some answers. I think we have about 73 participants here, so just keep them coming. But for the 15 who were able to answer our poll, trust and focus are the ones that seem to be the biggest problem or the challenge that they are actually encountering while we're leading a virtual team. And well, we will be answering some of these challenges, or how to overcome some of these challenges, later on. And I hope that you will engage with me as we discuss how do we overcome the challenge of trust and, of course, the challenge of focus now that we are leading a virtual team. For the internet, of course, it's something that is external, and we are just really hoping that that will be solved soon. But trust and focus, and I think disengagement is also slowly becoming a popular answer for everybody. And yes, we shall also talk about disengagement in the next few minutes of this webinar. So thank you very much for your participation in this poll. I'd like to also mention that aside from the ones that you have given us over at the previous slide, these are some of the other challenges that come up as we lead virtually. The first one is a variety of organizational structures are available, such as teams comprised of both virtual and face to face. We're now looking into hybrid work. And so with hybrid work, that's already again a different model of hoteling or combining virtual workers with face to face. And I think as we slowly, hopefully ease out of the pandemic, we are going to see a lot of offices moving into hybrid work. That is a new thing that we would have to face as leaders once again. That is a new challenge as we go through 2022 and as we move towards more of a combination of virtual and face to face within the workplace. Another challenge probably would be generational differences within teams and leaders because they create new challenges for what you've already mentioned, trust building, and of course, how to engage different generations. This has been a problem even before the pandemic, but more so again, becoming more apparent now that we are working in the virtual space. The third one is low engagement, and this can be really a serious problem with team members and leaders as we multitask. And because of the divided attention that we have, both in leading our home teams and, of course, our work teams, it's really a bit of a challenge as there are a lot of things going on. And of course, coupled with social media that notifies us every now and then and uh, signals that it has to be read or emails that have to be read. These are all the paradox of technology, as both technology can be a distraction and a catalyst that will support or not support this new space of multitasking. As I've mentioned, mobile technologies will play a bigger role in leading teams. And the mindset now is to return the message immediately. But are we really thinking things through before we even send a response? Do people require us to answer immediately a text message or a Viber or WhatsApp message? And then, of course, many leaders and team members have grown up with visual face to face contact, and finding the shift to, let's say, audio based interactions would become frustrating with communication as the number one thing that is sacrificed or suffers within teams. Mindset about leadership is that it needs to be face to face. And I know that you guys know that. This is what we call as managing by walking around. I'm sure you have heard of that term. And now that we're in the virtual space, there's really no managing by walking around, literally. These are, again, some challenges that we are facing as of the moment. And of course, if you are within the space of a global organization, global teams must negotiate different time zones, different language, accent challenges, and of course, the cultural differences that couple with virtual workplace. And so, again, I'd like to invite you to answer another poll. Given all these challenges and given the challenges that you have also mentioned a while ago, as leaders, what do you think are areas of strengths of behaviors that you think we still need to develop or we need to develop to manage a virtual workforce better? So, from your experience and by listening to all the challenges and looking at your answers a while ago over at the first poll, I'd like to ask you as leaders, what areas of strengths or behaviors do you think we need to develop to manage a virtual workforce better? So please go to slido.com and again answer it to hashtag manage virtual. I see some answers already. Patience is something that you guys were able to answer. Of course, we have adaptability, maturity. I see accountability, creativity, effective virtual communication. And of course, all of these things are somehow uh, studied or learned through experience. Delegation, we would need to relearn how to delegate again. That adaptability, that flexibility, that adaptive leadership, because it is a new business terrain, and we need to look into whether our wagons are still with round wheels or square wheels. More of listening and understanding, innovation, knowledge of current or new apps, technology, processes to monitor performance. And well, we are all aware of these strengths or behaviors that we need to develop. It's just that, of course, some of these things that we have written and some of the things that we have written here will take a lot of time to actually relearn, because we might know of these from our experiences. And if you are, let's say, a leader who has been leading a team for quite a while already, there are a lot of things that are already etched within our mindset as leaders. But then again, as we shift to the virtual space, there might be some things that we need to unlearn. And of course, there might be some things that also that we need to relearn out of how to do effective communication, how to do beauty in that box, how to do discipline, how to be adaptive, how to proceed with listening and empathy. And all of these things become new to us again. And as leaders, one of the behaviors or strengths that I think we really need to develop is openness to learn again, right? Openness to learn again, because what we previously know prior to this pandemic may no longer be a practice that can be applied within our context as of the moment. And I've heard this from one of my mentors. In this place of complexity, or in this what we call VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, complex, and of course ambiguous environment, a best practice can already be a past practice. And I'm not sure if you agree with that. A best practice can now be a past practice. And thus, in a world where it's VUCA, and looking at all the things that you have written here, we may need to look into emerging practices again. And one of the strengths or one of the behaviors that I think we really need to focus on is our openness to learning, to see things from a non judgment space or a beginner's mind once again, and try to untangle our old mindsets and be open to how do we innovate in this particular time? How do we express empathy in this particular time or in the present? How do we discipline? How do we delegate? And again, the openness to learn once again as leaders as regards how to handle virtual teams would be a good start for us to have the energy to flow once again into learning, and of course being appreciated as we lead our teams virtually. Now, thank you very much for participating in that poll. Now, I did not see this particular answer over at the poll, and so I'd like to float this as also a strength or a behavior, or probably also a concept that we need to develop as we handle virtual teams. Again, possibly because of my background in psychology, I'd like to look into how we are as leaders and our personality styles as leaders. Because one of the key elements that we need to consider in leading a virtual team is the impact of our personality styles as affecting this new way of working. And aside from the strengths or behaviors that you have answered in the previous poll, personality styles, our own personality styles, impact the way we work with and, of course, lead with others, because our personalities would probably be one of those which are etched already as a mindset or etched already in our being, so much so that we need to rediscover if our personality styles or our self awareness is still akin to the demands of leading a virtual team. And of course, we recognize that a style that might work on one type of team, virtual that is, will not necessarily work now that we are handling different types of teams and now that we are handling, again, people who are working from home. So, for example, a group of self managed programmers, if you are in the IT space, a group of self managed programmers or possibly consultants who want to report in quickly and be left alone should be dealt with differently compared to a more communicative or even a needy team, right? And when I say needy, possibly people who are more into face to face interactions or more interactions. I believe that in my experience in sales, for instance, I've handled a sales team and they need constant face to face and huddles. And that is unlike, of course, some consultants or programmers who would wish to be left alone as they do their jobs, or a team that is global or even geographically diverse or wide ranging versus a relaxed culture versus a conservative or highly hierarchical culture. And so there are a lot of contexts that we need to look into, and personality styles, of course, would have to adjust to these different contexts of teams as we handle each of them virtually. We need to then recognize our own personality styles and how these or how we impact our team. And it can be critical to the team success, of course, in the virtual space. Now, when you talk about personality styles, ladies and gentlemen, you might have already assessed yourselves a number of times for personality. Some popular tests which help us become aware of our personality styles are the DISC profile. I'm sure you have heard of the DISC, MBTI, Gallup, Charlie, Harrison, among others. And these tests reveal similarities in results. I'm sure you have taken a couple of these tests, and we will probably say that they're consistent in their results and how they assess us. In this particular program or our webinar today, allow me to use these four types of personality styles as shown on the slide, and which can be more similar to the DISC than any other test that I've mentioned previously. And you may be able to relate to the characteristics of a decisive driver, an enthusiastic collaborator, a detailed analyzer, or even a patient consensus builder. And I will summarize the characteristics of these personalities in the next slide. You may even be a combination of two, three, or even four of these personalities. Yet, as you know, we will always have a style that we use more frequently versus the others. So let's get to know these four personality styles. As you can see in this matrix, each of the four personality styles mentioned in the previous slide, they're characterized based on whether a style is task focused or relationship focused, or whether the personality operates externally or internally. Perhaps this can be understood better using the words extraversion or introversion. If you are a decisive driver, the decisive driver's biggest strengths are the ability to take charge and meet deadlines. His or her motto is work before play. And a decisive driver may like challenges. They can be dominant at times, forthright, and of course, action oriented. On the other hand, an enthusiastic collaborator, the biggest strength of this style is that they are very interacting, influencing, and they motivate others. Their motto is work is for contributing to people, society, and the world. And their motivators are verbal. They are motivators, rather. They are verbal, they are inspirational, and of course, they are group oriented. And as you can see, there's a difference already between a decisive driver and an enthusiastic collaborator. Over at the lower left side of the screen is a detailed analyzer. The detailed analyzers, the biggest strengths would be accuracy, dependability, self reliance, and self discipline. Their motto is work is best when I can do it alone, using facts to solve the problem. They are private people. They think before they act, and they are leaders who are accurate and logical. And of course, the last would be patient consensus builder. And this personality's biggest strengths would be the ability to listen and arrive at a consensus with others. His or her motto is work is best when I can work with and help people. They are good listeners, helpful, warm, and accommodating. Let me emphasize, as with all personality tests, that no style is better than the other. These are styles that we see most often in people. And as I've mentioned, you can be a combination of two of these styles, three even, or even all four, depending on the situation. And I hear a lot of leaders saying that I am very adaptive and can shift from one personality style to another. Yet, if you will observe yourselves, I'm sure you will also admit that there is some default, and this default style may be happening as a factor of the type of team that you are leading. And now that we are in the virtual space, right, and as we learn our own personality styles, let us highlight the impact of these factors or these styles as we manage teams virtually. Let us deepen the impact of we deepen, sorry, the impact of our personality styles when we communicate, when we engage in conflict virtually, the way we engage with people generally, the way we see results, the way we build trust, and of course, the way we coach. And now that we are leading teams virtually, if we were to examine a potential impact of our personality style and adjustment that may resolve issues within our team, I'd like to challenge you by thinking of a difficulty you are having with your virtual team as of present. And in the context of that difficulty, do you recognize the differences in personality styles between you and among your team members and how each of you perceive each other on the basis of working online? Are your personality styles creating or exacerbating any difficulties you're having? Let me give you an example. As a decisive driver, and if you are, your communication is brief. You consider that to be efficient. And that's something that you have learned along the years of leadership. But while your team performs well at a high level, because you are now operating virtually, they might miss on the details as you work online. And thus, maybe you need to be lengthier and more detailed, like a detailed analyzer, now that you do not see each other face to face and with less interaction, and may have communication gaps due to the work from home setup. Let me give you another example. Perhaps you would need to be more patient in building trust and relationships with those you newly hired as employees and who joined you during the pandemic, as you have not seen them face to face yet. And of course, in most communication, particularly nonverbal, people can be, or communication can be lost in translation due to working online. Our dear leaders, in the virtual space, when someone is being a problem, we often generalize their actions, behaviors, or failings from a context of a face to face environment. Yet, in the virtual space, it is being able to pinpoint exactly what the given individual is not doing or doing well, and that opens the door for a solution. And it might just be something about adjustment in personality styles. And as a leader, this may be a good time to develop your personality style or try a different personality style. I myself is trying to develop becoming a patient consensus builder out of an enthusiastic collaborator that I am now that I'm handling a team in the virtual space. Now that we have defined your role as a virtual leader, particularly in the space of understanding ourselves and others through our personality styles, let us now proceed to the discussion of our next agenda, building the virtual team. Yet, before I go there, if you have any questions, this might be a good time to answer them before we proceed. Please ask them over at the chat box, and I'm sure my colleagues from Contigral will alert me if there are any questions, and we will park them and, of course, try to answer them later on as we wrap up our webinar for today. I'd like to just acknowledge Cheryl Cordero's note over at the chat box. Right, virtual isn't as fluid in communication as when a group is face to face. Thank you very much, Cheryl, for agreeing with me on that. And because it isn't as fluid in communication, there has to be some again flexibility, as we all have mentioned a while ago. And do not fret if one time, even with the intention of flexibility and fluidity, or even as you try to be adaptive, you still commit or make a mistake in leadership. Please note that leadership is a journey. And as it is a journey, we need to learn from day on day experiences as to how to handle our teams and just really be open and be reflective on what works well and what gave you results and what did not give you results. And probably on a daily basis commit to doing things better, and how to, of course, again be open to learn new things as you gain more leadership skills for handling virtual teams. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to just chat them over at the chat box, or just put them over at the chat box, and I will be answering them later on. And so let me now proceed to the next part of our workshop, and this is building a solid team. And for this next topic, we have the following objectives: recognize the unique differences between the stages of building virtual and co-located teams, create and sustain trust among a virtual team, strengthen team networks for improved performance, recognize levels of engagement, and increase engagement in a virtual team. Elizabeth and Nancy, I am acknowledging your questions. Let me answer them later on when we proceed to the Q&A, but thank you very much for your questions. I'm acknowledging that I'm receiving them, and we'll be answering them later on too. And maybe the second part of our workshop will also enlighten you with some answers as well for your questions. So thank you very much, Elizabeth and Nancy, for chiming in on our discussion today. So before we start, may I invite you once again to engage with me through a quick poll by answering this multiple choice question. Are you familiar with the Bruce Tuckman's model of team development? And you have four choices here: yes, no, heard of it, but do not remember, or what's that? And it's totally okay if you don't, if you answer what's that. I have three people who answered no, 14 saying yes, 13% saying yes, but I think majority of the 9 is saying no, they're not familiar with the Bruce Tuckman's model of team development. What's that? Thank you for being honest. 6%, 6 people have heard it. Yes, 6%. Now it's 5%. I have 20 people who have already answered our poll. Let me check on how many we are now that we are here. Okay, so we have 22 people who have answered this poll. So thank you very much. But majority, you don't know what this is. And well, this is a concept that you will learn from EJ today. So what is the Bruce Tuckman's model of team development? All right, so along the way of leadership, there are a lot of considerations a leader must work around with. and one of which is where a leader's team is in terms of team development. Sort of like an evolution of a team, because a team does not automatically perform. It has to go through a certain number of phases or stages. And the most popular stages of team development concept was from Bruce Tuckman, and he developed this, believe it or not, in 1965, and up until now is quite relevant for our teams. If you will look at this model, we see that in pursuit of a vision, the leader must adjust also his leadership style and how he leads a team and how the vision is implemented upon examining where his or her team is in the stages of team development. And in this framework, we see that teams can move along the forming stage, where teams exhibit excitement and enthusiasm with, of course, fear and uncertainty as they try to work out what is expected of each of them. Teams can move along after the forming stage to the storming stage. And in the storming stage, there may be a lot of conflicts to manage as members try to challenge and question decisions. Hopefully, they bump themselves out of the conflict or storming stage and proceed to the norming stage, where team members are enabled to manage their own conflicts and when team members start to cooperate with one another. Ideally, the team ends up in the performing stage, the best stage where vision can come to fruition. And then a leader's team may move towards the adjoining stage where people, drawn by either internal or external factors, start to leave the team. And as a leader, there are different leadership styles that you'd have to do per each of these phases or stages of team development. In any of these stages, let me emphasize that the leaders must sense where his or where he or she can exhibit executive presence, able to ride the tide of the varied challenges as teams move across and within these stages. The context, however, of Bruce Tuckman was prior to the pandemic. This was in 1965. How does the stages of team development look like now that we are in a virtual team? Tuckman's team development framework takes on a different shape as we manage teams virtually. Do you see the difference between the traditional stages of team development versus team development in the virtual space? Note that in virtual team development, the storming or conflict stage is not separate as a phase. Conflict in the virtual space is handled as it happens. And let us quickly determine the stage your team is in now that you are in the virtual space. Because you might be performing prior to the pandemic, but because of the pandemic, because of COVID 19, you might have started once again in a new stage where your team is. And let us identify specific actions that will strengthen the stage or help move your team to the next level. And as you identify and analyze where your virtual team is in the stages shown here on the slide, you can probably see how the use of this model may address some stumbling blocks in your team. What do you see as actions you could take to increase team performance for the stage it is in? I will then give you a few moments to think about this. Possibly you can take a screenshot of this slide for further reflection. Is your team currently in the norming stage? Is it in the forming stage? Is it in the transforming stage or performing stage? Or is it in the adjoining stage? And of course, there are certain tips that we would like to suggest on how you would lead your virtual team if ever they are in a particular stage of team development as is shown on the slide. I hope that you were able to take a screenshot of this for further reflection even after this webinar. A while ago, you talked about trust. And let us deepen further our understanding of the stages and discuss factors that come into play within each phase. And as you know, a team cannot function without trust. And you have said this yourselves as a challenge now that you're in the virtual team. This comes in at the forming stage with clarification of roles and responsibilities at the transforming stage as relational trust. Please take note of what I'm going to say next. This is an important note on trust. Virtual teams fundamentally operate on task related trust based on clear roles and responsibilities. Relational trust is built over time. Let me repeat that. Virtual teams fundamentally operate on task related trust based on clear roles and responsibilities. Relational trust is built over time. While the leader is usually considered responsible for building trust in a team, it is actually a three-way street, particularly in virtual teams. What the leader does to build trust within the team, what individual team members do to build trust with the leader, what individual team members do to build trust with each other. Equally important is to know what destroys trust. And with this trust paradigm or mindset, we need to understand that trust is built as a system. It is not just the responsibility of the leader to build trust in a virtual team. Your team members are also accountable to build trust with you and with each other. And I have an acronym that you could use, DWYSYWD. Do what you say you will do is one of the most basic builders of trust. And as a leader and as a team member, I hope that you keep in mind this acronym. Do what you say you will do, especially in the virtual space, as you work with trust related trust for now, task related trust for now, and with that, relational trust will be built over time. It's a good start. Now, after the transforming stage comes the performing stage, as we have learned from the previous slides. This is the time during which tasks are regularly being accomplished. This requires collaboration, and so the structure of a team network is very critical to the level of performance they can achieve. And thus, it is important to use or to introduce network maps in your team to help analyze the strengths and weaknesses of your networks so that you can adjust it. What am I saying here? You need to sometimes be very strategic to identify who to pair with or who team member is partnered with in a particular project just to build up on collaboration and effective combination of strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes they figure it out on their own, but as a leader, it might be good to understand the network of your team members so as you can maximize each of their strengths and what they are strong in terms of competency, and of course complement it with people who would need some areas for improvement, and thus also making sure that you have a good match in terms of doing projects as you assign it to them. And again, sometimes you need to be deliberate about these things. That's something that you would need to relearn as you delegate tasks to your team members. Another challenge that you were able to mention a while ago is employee engagement, particularly in doing tasks at hand. The following statistics, which I'm not going to be reading for you, but you can actually already take a screenshot of this particular slide. They reveal so much about what affects team member engagement in the virtual space. This slide shows statistics for multitasking and the differences depending on technology. This is something that I found really powerful. And I'm not sure if you will agree with me on this. Towards the end of the slide, it mentions that multitasking is actually a myth. It is quickly switching attention from one thing to another. We're not actually multitasking according to this slide. What we're actually doing is switching attention from one thing to another. And why did I find this powerful? Because as a leader, we need to recognize that possibly we need to also think about how to lessen the focus or the distraction of our employees from switching from one thing to another, so much so that they can accomplish something at the end of the day. Because we probably are not multitaskers. We're probably just really easily distracted and moves our attention or switch our attention from one thing to another. And as a virtual leader, it might mean that possibly we need to again be strategic in terms of the assigned tasks, so much so that we give some support in terms of focus or how to help our team members focus on what are priorities. And thus, it is imperative that we learn new prioritization tools and how to delegate priorities to our team members as we handle them in the virtual space. You can chat in with me some of your thoughts as regards this particular statement over at this slide. Multitasking is a myth. It is quickly switching attention from one thing to another. And that's where distractions come in. And there are a lot in the virtual space. And as we speak of team member engagement, I would like to share with you the different levels of engagement, which can be presented as a challenge in leading your virtual workforce. There are members who are disengaged. There are people with selective participation. There are low-level engagement people. There are also moderately engaged people. There are highly engaged people within your teams, and of course, leading teams. And I'm not saying that, well, one person will remain disengaged all her employee life. Sometimes a particular project makes a team member disengaged, but another project makes that same team member highly engaged. So there are a lot of factors also happening in terms of their engagement. And so it's also very unfair to actually generalize that this being or this human being or this employee is 100% disengaged with his work. Probably disengaged with one kind of work, but highly engaged in another. And we need to reflect on that as well. Now, wherever they are in their levels of engagement, these are some of our tips as to how to manage them better or how to lead them better. If they're disengaged, let's do a coaching approach. Try to find out the root cause of why they are disengaged. Selective participation, a coaching approach. Let us solicit ideas for more involvement. Low level engagement, reconsider their team workload, reprioritize their work, and shift projects to reduce their stress. If they're moderately engaged, assign a part of the agenda to this person to increase the responsibility for team success. If they're highly engaged, empower the person to mentor others, stretch their goals, extend recognition because they love that, and involve in other assignments that will continue to maximize that person's involvement. And if they are leading, showcase this employee's contributions to the rest of the organization and provide opportunities for greater leadership in the team. Encourage this person to mentor others as well. And so these are our tips as to how to lead a engagement per team member, per task in a virtual environment. Time flies really fast, and we have finally reached the top of the hour. And this is where we all stop and reflect on the things that we have already learned in this short, yet hopefully learning filled webinar for all of you. There are a lot of other things we can discuss about how to lead virtual teams, and within the AMA space, we sincerely would like to share this with you and the rest of your organization as part of your learning and development paths. Yet before we end, through the chat box, may we invite you to write down some questions, some key learning points which you can apply based on your discussion today on how to improve your virtual work performance. We actually have 5 more minutes to go, and so I'd like to answer some of your questions. Please share your experience with employees that you have had a concern with when you adjusted your personality from face to face to more virtual. Okay, so I'm a enthusiastic collaborator, and in the face to face in a face to face setup, Nancy, I'd like to like really be, collaborating, but because of the virtual space, there are a lot of limitations out of that, and so I needed to shift my personality style and learn some few things on being a patient consensus builder and try not to immediately like like expect collaboration, because in the virtual space people are not as ready to collaborate, possibly because of, well, a lot of factors that are happening from work from home and a lot of distractions, as we have mentioned. And so, like all of you, I need to build up on my patience and try to shift myself from being very enthusiastic and very extroverted to uh, trying to bring myself into introversion as well, right? And that's from my own experience. I hope that helps, Nancy. Elizabeth, can you please give a little more differentiation between styles 2 and 4? Style 2, I believe, Elizabeth, is the enthusiastic collaborator and the patient consensus builder. The enthusiastic collaborator is quite impatient when it comes to collaboration because their energies are really high. And so they sometimes force collaboration even if other people are not ready. A patient collaborator is not like that. A patient consensus builder will try to marinate the environment for a while and see whether people are ready to build ideas together and strike when the the space is already ready for collaboration, right? So thank you for that. Um, Maria Feminina passes. Why doesn't storming occur in a virtual team? Is it due to distance or conflict is often not addressed? Actually, it's not just really obvious. Sometimes conflict happens and you might not see it as obvious. And so you might need to also be more sensing as a leader in terms of making sure that there are issues that are not kept and that all issues are well obvious or just brought up, so much so that people do not unnecessarily hold on any of their thoughts, because it's easy to hide feelings in the virtual space. uh, a leader that I have interviewed, even if he or she is pissed, she doesn't show it because she just really turns off her camera. And there might be some disadvantages out of that because it actually brings an atmosphere where people are not anymore as, I guess, transparent and open with what they feel about a particular issue. And so that has to again be uh, brought up or brought out in the open, just so that it can help uh, bring people towards the goal that they are trying to achieve. Evelyn says, agree, mindfulness being the moment is better. Thank you very much for your questions. This is really good. So I hope that I've answered all your questions well. If you have other questions, feel free to put them here. This discussion would be one of the tools to become the new practices for the past practices to become best. Yes. And in 2 words, Renante, that would be emerging practices. In a VUCA environment, leaders would need to be open as regards developing emerging practices. And past practices or best practices can be a good foundation for those. Ladies and gentlemen, we are excited to know you through your training and webinar needs. And if you have any interest in any of our programs or to continue with the learning we have started today, please feel free to reach out to us through our website and, of course, our social media accounts, particularly through email, Facebook, and LinkedIn. All right, so Ruby, one last, we do not see relevant body language or tone in the virtual space. However, this is also a level playing field, especially for introverts to express themselves. That's so true. I have an introvert face within me as well, a facet within me, Ruby. Yet I need to also make sure that I'm not as introverted, so much so that I keep my thoughts to myself and not participate in the discussion, because I'd like to also be able to contribute to the discussion of a team. And sometimes some people who are introverted may just really be keeping things to themselves, and that might also be not as, again, good in terms of, building a team. And we need to be mindful of those within our teams as well. So thank you, Ruby, for that. Has attrition gone up or gone down with the work at home setup in other industries? Why? So I've been hearing a lot of the great resignation, Feminina. And over at LinkedIn, they actually have like a poll now saying, do you believe that there is a big resignation? But from my own mindset, and this is just really my thoughts are, there are a lot of things that we can do to avoid the big resignation, and not to just really accept that. We need to be mindful again that there are employees who would like to stay with us, and let's also capitalize on that willingness and that openness to stay with us. More so that we need to also acknowledge those who would wish to stay with us by giving them possibly a space where they can also talk to us about their concerns about work from home, or a dialogue. And I think a lot of us would probably be opening ourselves in the coming months for dialogue among our employees, just to see where they are and to get some inputs as to how to develop new ways of working as we move towards the new normal of working. So thank you very much, Feminina, for your question. Okay, so I end here. One last slide uh, from my partners from Quintegral. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please scan this QR code and tell us what you think about our event. We would like to hear your feedback, and if you have any time at all, please scan this QR code and tell us what you think. Thank you also, Terence, for the participation. I really appreciate all of you here. Thank you, Feminina, for your participation over at the chat box. And for everybody who's here, please tell us what you think of this webinar. And from all of us at Quintegral, Trainocate, and of course the American Management Association, we wish to thank you all for attending our event today. As a final word, we believe that when managed effectively, virtual teams increase productivity, help meet organizational goals, and improve quality of work. I'd like to wish everybody a good rest of the week. Please keep yourselves healthy and please keep safe all the time. Again, my name is EJ, and it is a privilege to be with everyone today. On behalf of my Integral Philippines family, thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much, everybody. See you all next time. Thank you for attending.